What's up, YouTube? I'm the homie Joshua. Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And today I'm going to talk about self-defense as it applies to gang members, or does it apply, right? And to kind of unpack this, I'm going to make a reference to a case that I worked on as a defense gang expert, which is a role that I've held since 2012. And you can actually click on this link right here to see the video where I explain what that is and how I came about to that work. And so this case centers around a guy named Angel Diaz Escobar. And I can say his name without betraying confidence because there is a published report of an appeal that he had on this case that I will post a link to in the description. So anyways, Angel's walking. He's from a neighborhood called 22nd and Bryant. And sometimes it's called BSL, Bryant Street Locals. Long-standing, been around since at least the 80s, a central kind of neighborhood in the Mission District of San Francisco. So he's walking from his community, and he goes up by Garfield Park, like the far end, so 26th and Treat, I want to say, right? Those familiar with San Francisco know what I'm talking about. It's very close to Army Street, where Cesar Chavez. And so he walks, probably like a 15-minute walk. And as he's walking by the park on that side, he notices some people. Somebody leaves that park and comes out on the street and confronts him. And this little confrontation happens. Ultimately, Angel pulls a gun. He shoots. Nobody's hit. And he runs down the street with the gun pointed at these individuals, maybe or maybe not shooting. All this is caught on video, right? Because in San Francisco, and even back, this happened in 2013 is when the incident happened. I wound up working on the case in 2018 because that's how long he sat in the county jail fighting his charges. And his charges were attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and a felon in possession of a firearm. That felony is like a prior burglary or something, right? So not a violent incident. So he's fighting his case. I get involved because now it's going to trial. And my argument was 22nd and Bryant / BSL is not a gang. And what Angel did was not for the benefit or at the direction of a gang. And he has no history of behavior that reflects doing stuff for the benefit of or at the direction of the gang. So they are not a gang under the law. Now, the word gang is kind of thrown around in pop culture, but there's also a legal definition, and he did not fit that legal definition. So the prosecutor comes out and points out that Angel's wearing red when he's walking, right? He had his arm in a sling from a prior incident. So he's kind of wearing a windbreaker, right? It's the city. And on one side, he's wearing it properly. On the other side, it's just kind of draped over because his arm is in a sling. So like, man, he's wearing red. He traveled outside of his neighborhood. And there's all these pictures of him standing with other people that are from the same neighborhood, standing in front of a fence that has a big 22B on it and has Welga birds, which they say is all gang related. Pictures of him wearing red on other instances. He actually got 22B tattooed on his knuckles while he was in the county jail fighting this case. They used that against him. And felt like they had a slam dunk, right? My argument was, he's not a gang member. And 22B, 22nd and Bryant, is not a gang. It's a community, right? And Angel had come from El Salvador. His parents brought him. They had migrated there. And that's the only place in the States that he had ever really lived. So, yes, there are some people from that community who commit crimes. There are people from every community, though, that commit crimes. And we don't always call those people gang members. Yes, he is proud of where he's from. But there's no law against being proud of where you're from. And in fact, in lower income communities and community of color, it's very common. There's no law against dressing like your friends, right? There's no law against identifying with these particular symbols. He's a part of the community. The prosecutor said, well, look, 22nd and Bryant's not even a community, it's just an intersection. And I said, to you, it's just an intersection. But to the people who live there, it's their neighborhood, it's their community, and it's all they really have. And so, anyways, I won't get into all the details of the arguments made back and forth. But I was able to convince the jury that 22nd and Bryant's not a gang, and or Angel is not a member of that gang, and his behavior that day was not reflective of some gang loyalties. And the reason that's important is because while he wasn't charged with a gang crime or gang enhancements, the idea that he is a gang member was central to the prosecution's case. So, because if he's a gang member, there is no legal justification for what had happened, right? He has no other recourse because gang members do things over respect and gang members are violent. And, you know, the whole narrative that many of us that have been in the system have heard before, right? So once the jury believed that he wasn't in a gang, then his argument, which was always his argument, of self-defense had some traction. So Angel testified in his defense. And he breaks down the video piece by piece. And he says, look, man, I'm going, in this area for reasons that have nothing to do with neighborhood stuff, man. I'm going to see a female, right? And somebody kind of comes and confronts me. And I got nervous, right? I got nervous because my arm is messed up. And I didn't know what was going to happen. And I didn't want a conflict. And I slipped off the side of the curb and there's cars driving by real fast. And I thought a car was going to hit me. And I got spooked and I panicked. And I pulled out the banger, right? And I'm not carrying a gun because I want to hurt anybody. I'm carrying a gun because I live in and am traveling through relatively violent communities. I have been a victim of violence by these unknown people in the past who have jumped on me. That's why I have my arm in a sling. So I'm a little kind of paranoid. And that's why I have the gun. I don't want to hurt anybody. I just want to protect myself and not get jumped in case anybody wants funk, right? So thankfully for him, the bullets he had in his gun were mixed match. So the first one fired, the rest of the bullets wouldn't fire, right? Basically, even though it's a revolver, it jammed. So nobody's hit, right? And the jury, upon hearing his very eloquent and impassioned explanation of what happened, they deadlock. They deadlock, which means they cannot reach a conclusion, right? They can't reach a unanimous verdict on the attempted murder or on the assault with a deadly weapon. So essentially, he was found not guilty, right? Not essentially, factually, he was found not guilty. He was found guilty of a felon in possession of a firearm. That is what he ended up appealing, and that is what you will see if you click on the link in the description talking about his case, right? So you won't hear the stuff about the attempted murder and the assault with a deadly weapon. You'll hear that he was charged. You'll read that he was charged with those things, and you'll read that he was, the jury deadlocked on those two charges. But you won't hear a ton of the details. Besides, hey, he's walking down the street, he goes by a park, he shoots, points a gun, this is what happens. So in that case, had the jury believed the prosecution and believed that he was a gang member, he would have no self-defense claim. Because the argument is a gang member, and this is not necessarily the written law, right? But it is the informal understanding, maybe is a better way to put it. A gang member cannot claim self-defense because a gang member is always walking around looking for funk and looking for problems. And a gang member will overreact to the slightest perceived threat or perceived disrespect because that is how gang members are wired, right? And that is how they're indoctrinated, and that's what they're taught to do. So if a gang member shoots, it's the gang member's fault. And no matter what is happening around them or to them, which obviously doesn't make a lot of sense, but the challenge is you have to get the jury or the prosecutor through reports where they just like, I don't even want to fight this, and they'll dismiss it. But in trial, you have to get the jury to understand the cultural nuances, right? And so some of the examples that I used were examples that they could understand, right? What about a New Yorker who moves to San Francisco and they've been in San Francisco for 30 years, but you ask them where they're from, they're going to say they're from New York, right? Because they identify with where they came up at. You ask him where he's from, he's going to say 22nd and Bryant, not as a gang member, but because that's where he identifies. And yes, he's very proud of being from there. In my personal opinion, and I've expressed it on this platform before, everybody should be proud of where they're from, right? That doesn't mean you have to be in conflict with people that are not from where you're from. But there's no law against having pride. And so he wound up getting those charges. He wound up being found not guilty. And then he had time served already for the gun. So he was able to go home within a matter of days of that trial, when he could have gone to prison for attempted murder. So the self-defense worked, but you had to kill the idea amongst the jury that he's a gangster in order for them to even start to consider if it could have been self-defense. So another situation, which I didn't work this case, but this is a very good personal friend of mine. His name's Shark out of Pittsburgh, right? Sharky, Jesse. So Jesse was with the business, right? And he found himself in a situation where he was getting shot at, right, by these unknown people. He's getting shot at. He winds up getting hit, I believe. And he happens to have a couple guns on him, so he shoots back. Hits 2 people. Goes to court. Now, this is a pretty clear case, you would think, of self-defense, because somebody shot you and you shot back. That is defending yourself, right? And again, there's laws around whether he should have had a gun, just like in Angel's case, but the sentence for, a felon in possession of a firearm is far lesser than attempted murder charges, right? The judge says, no, this is no self-defense case, because you put yourself in a situation in which there was a high likelihood somebody was going to shoot at you. And you knew that because that's why you had guns. You knew you were going into a violent environment, and yet you still made the choice to go. And so that shows you the other side of the coin. This man was shot and yet couldn't claim self-defense, right, for shooting back. So this idea of self-defense has been in the news a lot lately because of the Kyle case. And I'm not going to get into the merits of that particular case. I haven't followed it very closely. I remember when it happened. I have some basic understanding of what happened, but I haven't tuned into the news all the time and all that stuff. And I know people have very passionate feelings from multiple perspectives. And I have no interest in getting into an argument with any of those folks, again, because I don't have the information to really defend a point of view. What I will say is there is a discrepancy. There's a change in who and who doesn't qualify for a self-defense argument. And some of that is based on the laws in different states, of course, right? But it's also a cultural thing. It's also a public perception thing. And it has to do with the resources that the prosecutor's office has versus the resources that the defendant has, in terms of their attorney. There's other stuff that comes to play. But what it really comes down to is, from the position of the viewer, do you identify with this person claiming self-defense? Or do you identify with the people on the other end of the gun, right? And there's not a lot of interaction between those two camps, not positive at least. People will tend to see the world and their environment in a way that makes them comfortable, right? We are drawn towards comfort. So, and our comfort comes in this way, in part from these echo chambers that we live in. So whatever we think, whatever we feel, we kind of put it out there, but that same thing is echoed back to us by our family, by our friends, by the media, by whatever, right? Because we include ourselves in a circle of people and of influence and of information that matches what we are comfortable with. And that is not unique to one point of view or the other, right? People across the board are that way. But it causes them to be in all these separate camps and not find what they have in common. I would say there should be an allowance for self-defense. Whether this case qualifies or not is not the point. But whatever that allowance is, should apply evenly, right? If you can walk into a situation with a weapon, that you have reason to believe could be a violent situation and you could be a target, even if you don't do anything wrong, right? You could just be a target for whatever reason, because you look out of place in that neighborhood, because you are not supporting what the folks in the street are doing, whatever it may be. If you can go somewhere where there's a pretty good chance people are not going to like you and accept you, and I think legally you should be able to travel. I think that's the individual choice. So I'm not suggesting that we start putting boundaries on where people can and can't go. Everybody should be able to go wherever they want. But if you're going to go someplace that you know is an issue, and you come armed, anticipating that issue, then if you run across an issue and you use that weapon, if that is going to be self-defense, that's fine. But then it needs to be self-defense for everybody, right? People could say in Angel's case, justice was done because he was able to claim self-defense and he was done. Now, generally, when you claim self-defense, the prosecutor doesn't push it, right? Self-defense should keep you out of a trial, ideally. Not always. Yes, what happened with him ended up being pretty fair in Angel's case. But it was only because he was able to challenge the prosecution's gang expert and the prosecution's police witnesses and the narrative that they threw, which they throw all the time, and it's very similar. And they learn, they rewrite their playbook constantly. They know what judges are which way. They know how the jury in their community is generally going to hear stuff and what's going to tickle their ears and what's going to push them away. And they refine their approach based on that constant knowledge, right? Because it's the only county they're working in. In Angel's case, and not to toot my own horn, because I would love to see far more people from other neighborhoods and other ethnic backgrounds and other experiences also be gang experts. And I said that in the video. But he was fortunate to have somebody who was able to not just understand, but to articulate to a very different population, which is the jury, what that understanding is, and get them to start to see him differently. And when they see him differently, they can identify with his fear. They can identify with his issue. So then at least some of them believe that he's not, this ain't no gangster shit. This is just, hey, bro, I was spooked and I happen to have it and I pulled it. So most people don't get that, right? Most people don't have those resources. There's only a handful of people doing gang expert work that actually have experience from the neighborhood, have experience from prison, have experience with quote unquote gangs. There's a handful, I'm not the only one, but there's not many. There's not enough, and we don't get enough exposure to cover all the cases like these cases, right? And especially when you look nationally, And so, yes, things worked, but we know that what happened in Angel's case often doesn't happen in similar situations. And again, my homeboy Shark, which was years prior in Contra Costa County, is an example of that, right? Of how it's just thrown out the window. So, anyway, self-defense, my belief is there has to be a consistent framework for it. And it's not just the law as it's written. It's how it is applied. Because as we know from 3 strikes, as we know from gang enhancements, as we know from plenty of laws, especially in California, the law could be written one way, but its interpretation can change so much that it becomes a different law than what it was designed to be. So we need to go a step above what does the law say and really hold people accountable in the courtroom, both on the prosecution and the defense side, to advance the letter of the law, right? And when that law is not good, then the community should put forth a different law and eventually come to something that people can stand behind. So those are my 2 cents on, on self-defense as it applies to gang members. Look around. There's a variety of content in this channel, whether it's mental health stuff or legal stuff. I'm not a lawyer. I do not give legal advice. That's my disclaimer. My time in prison, some lessons I've learned, stuff about relationships. It varies, right? This is not a prison channel. This is a help others move in excellence channel. So if you're new here, please look around. Consider subscribing and turning on notifications and all the other stuff that people that are on YouTube ask viewers to do. And have a good day, man. Help others move in excellence and help yourself at the same time. That is the movement. Take care.